Hey there, welcome to the second part of my power rankings for this week, the APAC region power rankings. This one should be a lot shorter. I don't quite have as much to say about these teams as I do about the NA teams, just because I don't usually get to watch the APAC region matches live, and I don't have a lot of time to watch the VODs afterwards, so I've tried my best to catch up on them this week, but there was one or two matches that I missed, so I might not have as much to say about these teams, but I'll still try and throw my insights in there, I'll still try and throw my analysis in there, and I'll do my best to express how I feel about these teams. You guys will have different opinions to me when you're watching this video, so feel free to leave them in the comments below, and if you have any questions or anything that you want me to go further on, feel free to ask, because I'd love to answer. But yeah, not much else to say in the intro, so might as well get straight into it. Starting off, 7th place in the APAC regions. I think it's pretty obvious who I'm going to say here. It's Chengdu Hunters. They're really just not a good team, to be honest. If I was to make an overall power rankings, they would probably be in my bottom 5, if I'm being brutally honest with you, because I just don't think their roster on a fundamental level works. It really just doesn't. None of this team has the depth in terms of hero pools, in terms of their own personal hero pools, I should say, to function as a team currently. I don't think they are comfortably able to play any meta right now. And to explain what I mean by that, there's generally 3 go-to comp structures in Overwatch. Those are dive, brawl, and spam. They're all quite different. They have a little bit of overlap between each other, but generally those are the 3 that you build around. And this team, because of their players and their individual hero pools, just don't seem, at least, to be able to play any of those 3 comps comfortably. Look at Among, for example, their main tank. He seems to be mostly capable on Wrecking Ball, and Wrecking Ball, I think, has been more so this year played as an off tank than he's been played as a main tank. I think there's been one meta this entire year, and that was Ball Zarya at the very start of the year, where Wrecking Ball was played as a main tank. And since then, he's been played as an off-tank. So having a main tank player who specializes in an off-tank hero, it's just not great. And he's not bad at the other main tank heroes. He's decent on Rhine. He's okay at Orisa, and he has his moments as Winston. Winston, he's very back and forth on. He's had his moments where he's absolutely thrown matches on Winston, but then he's also had moments where he's looked fine on Winston, so I'd say his Winston is passable. But you want a little bit more than passable on your main tank at the moment, and I don't think it's good enough. Elsa is another player on this team that I'd say plays a passable D.Va, a passable Sigma, and then nothing else very well on top of that. You have Bacon Jack, who is great on the Widowmaker, but that's it, really. He doesn't play anything else to a very good standard. Jinmu, who can play a really good Pharah, can play a really good Genji, but can you really think of Jinmu popping off on any other hero? I can't. And when the entire season is requiring you to have good Echo players, good Ashe players, good Tracer players, good well, for Flex DPS in particular, it's mostly to do with, at the moment anyway, it's mostly to do with Echo and Torb a little bit, and obviously double hit scan being around. Probably if Leave is going to be their Ashe, then if Leave is going to be their Tracer, then Jinmu would obviously be their go-to Ashe player or their Widow or their Widow player, but he doesn't play Widow, and so they'd have to sub in Bacon Jack, but Bacon Jack only plays Widow, which limits them. Are you seeing the issue that they have? They just don't seem to be able to play the game because of their roster. On some fundamental level, their roster is just not good enough. What I will say is Leave seems decent when he's able to play Tracer or McCree. Again, very limited hero pool there, but when he is able to play those 2 heroes, he looks pretty good. And Molly, as well, has been a standout player for them so far this season. Molly, I think, would comfortably be able to play on most of the other teams in the APAC region too. He really is just a standout player for them on the flex support role. And Iveltal and Lengser, the 2 of them, have both been fine on the main support role too. So as far as the supports go for this team, they're good. But if I was the owner of Chengdu Hunters right now, if I was a coach on the Chengdu Hunters, I would seriously be looking into getting almost a whole new roster next season, because there's too many holes in this roster as far as hero pools go, and it will make it so that no matter what meta it is, they will always have something that just holds them back, which isn't good enough. Anyway, I went on for a little too long about them. So moving on, 6th place, London Spitfire. London, where they don't have holes on their roster in particular, they seem to have a good roster of players. They just really seem quite mediocre. They're not exactly inconsistent. They've had games where they have overperformed, that's for sure, but they don't seem like an inconsistent team. They just are meh. Like, they're just a very middling team, in my opinion. If I had to compare them to any team in the NA region, I would probably compare them to something like Boston, which is just a team that at the moment, or Atlanta Reign would be a good one too, which is just a team that at the moment is just eh. You know, they seem decent. They don't seem great. They don't seem too bad. They just seem meh, very middling. What I will say is they had a good performance against New York Excelsior, though. This is what I mean by sometimes they do overperform. They have a tendency to overperform every now and again. And New York Excelsior was one of the matches where I do think they did overperform quite a bit. And Glister as well was very impressive on the Tracer for me. His Glister's Tracer seems like his best hero by far so far this season. Other than that, I really can't say much about London other than they're just a pretty mediocre team who... Overall, when you look at their roster, I see a bunch of mediocre players playing mediocre Overwatch, and it's not particularly a bad thing, but you know, it's you'd want more, especially in the APAC region at the moment. 5th place, Seoul Dynasty. This really is the most inconsistent team that we've ever had in the Overwatch League, isn't it? They have gone from being complete garbage, having records set against them by middling teams, to being finalists in the main melee, playing an almost 4-0 match against Shanghai, to now being easily beaten by teams that they, on paper, should be putting away fairly easily. I don't honestly know what to say about this team. They're difficult to fathom, to be honest. They're difficult to put into words. It's just... I'll try my best to break it down. So I mentioned about the 3 comps that tend to be played, or the 3 comp structures that tend to be played earlier in Brawl, Spam, and Dive. Seoul Dynasty seem to be able to play one of these quite well, that being Spam. But when they play Brawl... I want to put it down to the tanks, because Marvel, where he is improving on D.Va, he doesn't seem like the greatest in the world, and Gesture is just... He really is only comfortable on Orisa at this point. Like, when you look at his Reinhardt, he clearly just doesn't know what he's doing on the hero. Like, I'd imagine if you were to play against him in comp, then he'd destroy you. But comp is so different to Owl level play, and in Owl level play, he seems lost on Reinhardt, and he seems absolutely lost on Winston. God, don't get me started on the Seoul Dynasty's dive. It is terrible. It is terrible dive. The Chengdu Hunters and the London Spitfire, if they were to play dive against Seoul Dynasty and Seoul Dynasty played dive into them, they would lose 10 times out of 10 because their dive is just that bad. They don't understand dive at all, and I feel like if you were to ask these players individually how dive should be played, they would all have a good understanding of how dive's supposed to be played, but they just don't do it. It's the most frustrating thing to watch, because you have players on this team, you have standout players like Prophet on this team who, on paper, you read that name and you think, wow, this team should be really strong, and then you see the way they play dive and they just miss out on fundamental basics of dive. Like, they don't stage dives. Do you know how basic that is? Tier 2 teams, you'd be hard pressed to find a tier 2 team at the moment that doesn't understand dive enough to stage dives before they go in. Gesture, you'll see him, instead of getting himself in a good position to dive from, which is what staging a dive is, he'll just leap across the map and end up on half HP before he lands into the entire team. He doesn't even use his jump to get to a good position. He just goes straight in, which is mind-bogglingly bad for an Overwatch League team. Honestly, these guys, in my opinion, are lucky to be rated higher than... Oh, the camera's out of focus. Oh, there it is. This team, Seoul Dynasty, in my opinion, right now, are lucky to be rated higher than London. And if Chengdu didn't have such an unbelievably bad performance against London recently, I think I would be fairly comfortable in rating Seoul below Chengdu as well. The only thing that's stopping me from rating them lower than they are now is the fact that I know that they have the potential to play like they did in the May Melee. I know that this is the same team that can do that, and honestly, when it comes to the playoffs matches soon and the Summer Showdown, I can see them powering up again, because they do seem like a team that needs some sort of meaning behind their matches for them to put the full effort in. But honestly, when I watch this team, I just see disappointment. Prophet is trying his best on the Tracer. He's playing not the best Tracer that we've seen in the Overwatch League, for sure. He's not up there with the elite Tracers like Striker or Yaki or Shax. Oh my god, Shax. He's not quite up there. He's not quite up there with those players just yet. Or Fletter as well, I should mention. But he's playing a decent Tracer at least. He's definitely the standout player on this team right now. Toby, I don't feel like gets enough value given to him from the Overwatch League community either. He's been doing his best on this team. But when you have players like Bedosin just throwing with his positioning on Ana, honestly, and then you have players like Gesture who go deep as Winston when the rest of his team is backing out, and then Marvel on off tank when he's a main tank player. Oh, playing on this team must be so difficult, and I feel for them a lot. Fitz as well as another player I should shout out as being someone who is so clearly just trying on this team, but he's not getting anywhere with it because the rest of the team just seems like they're throwing these games away. And one thing I do want to mention as well is that on paper this team should be really good at double shield comps, but recently just haven't been. I want to look further into why that's been the case, and they didn't play amazingly bad against Guangzhou on some maps in their series against Guangzhou, but there were also times where they just absolutely threw against Guangzhou, and I can't overlook those times. Seoul just... They're a disappointing team for me, honestly. On paper, this roster should be something great, but they're really just not. And honestly, if I had to be honest, I think a lot of it is that Gesture is just not as good as he was in previous seasons, and Gesture just seems like a pretty bad main tank, honestly, right now. And if I had to put it down to any one player, it would be Gesture. But there are other issues on this team. It's not just Gesture. Anyway, I've gone on about them for way too long. Next team up, 4th place, New York Excelsior. I really think this team could be higher on this list in coming weeks. I think their issues seem to be on a coaching level, and where I think I see the potential, I see it. I see everything there for New York Excelsior to be the 2nd best team in APAC. Not quite the best team in APAC, but I can see them having the potential there to be 2nd best. And they're just not living up to it. And you know what? They haven't lived up to it for last season. They haven't been living up to it towards the end of last season when Rollock came in. They weren't living up to it. And honestly, they haven't been living up to it for the majority of this season either. So I just, with New York, I just feel disappointment. Not quite on the same level as I feel for Seoul, but with New York, I really do just feel disappointment. And I can't blame it on any one particular player or any one particular staff member, because I don't know what goes on behind the scenes. But what I can see from their gameplay is that, and this is where a lot of their issues, not only this season but last season as well, stem from, is they cannot for the life of them decide on a 6-man roster that they just want to field all the time and play all the time and be comfortable with. And it's most notable in their DPS, because they sub in and sub out DPS seemingly at random, and it sucks because they could be so much better if they would just find a DPS roster that they can stick with and practice with and then play with in matches. They would be so much better for it. But they seem to just randomly sub in Nene and Sabiorbi and play them for a map, but then next map sub in Haxel because we have Haxel now and we can play him. And then even though Nene's back and Nene's been playing amazingly well on hitscan, we'll sub him out and we'll put, say, Bjorby in on the hitscan this time, and we'll have Libero with him. Why not? It just seems random. I can't find any patterns as to what they're going for. They started out their series with Nene and Saebyeolbe, and I think for this meta that makes perfect sense. The line of thinking behind having a Tracer player and then a hitscan player to follow up on that is perfectly fine. And honestly, if it was me on the coaching staff, I would have done the exact same thing. But Saebyeolbe, I don't think is quite... I don't want to say that he's bad at Tracer, because he definitely isn't. But I think the way he plays Tracer is just not exactly what the meta is calling for. Tracer right now is very much being played for frag potential. You'll see the top Tracers, like I mentioned before, like Shax and Fleta and Yaki and Striker, are the Tracers that go out of their way in team fights to just frag the fuck out, and just you'll see it just by looking at the kill feeds, honestly, in these matches where these Tracer players have been playing. It's the majority of the time the final blows are going to the Tracer players, and there's a reason for that. Tracer should be played in a very fraggy style right now, and Saebyeolbe just doesn't seem to play in that way. He plays in a much more sort of sit back, analyze, and then go in way, which is just not what Tracer is being played for right now, and so I think he struggles with it. The good thing about this roster, though, is that they have another really good Tracer player in Nene, so maybe they could attempt at some point trying Nene on the Tracer, and then possibly, I don't know, it might be a decent idea to try and run Libero as their hit scan, which sounds crazy at first, but consider just 2 seasons ago, Libero was probably arguably the best Widowmaker on this roster. I don't think it would be the worst idea to at least try maybe running Nene on the Tracer for the frag potential, and then having Libero be the more supportive hitscan DPS, which I think he would actually be quite good at. Other than their DPS, the other members of their team, what can I say? Jonak is still doing as great as ever on flex support. Mano is still as consistent as ever on main tank. Still, I think, one of the best main tanks in the league. Animo, I think, is doing fine on main support. I really don't understand what all the stuff about on Reddit about people thinking Mandu was going to come in and be the big thing that changes this team and makes them the #1 in the APAC region. I don't get it. I don't know where that whole stuff about Mandu came from. I don't think Mandu is a bad player at all. I really don't know where people got this sort of idea that he would come in and change the team from the ground up. It seems quite weird to me that people thought that. It felt like they were just pulling that out of thin air. But yeah, for my money, keep Animo in the starting 6. He's doing fine. And then other than that, Hotba, I think he's doing okay, but he's struggling. I think when you compare him to other off-tanks in the APAC region and the league as a whole, I don't think he's quite living up to their standards. And so, because of that, New York are struggling a little bit in neutral fights. Again, I don't mean to say that Hotba is bad in particular, but I think he could be doing a lot better. And even when you compare him to the other players on his team, I don't think he's quite living up to their standards right now. So I'd love to see a bit more from Hotba coming forwards. But yeah, for the most part, this team's issues, they stem from the DPS. I think just decide on a DPS setup to have and just stick with, and I think this team will benefit from that a lot. I know I just sounded very harsh on New York Excelsior, but I still think these are a top team. I still think if I was to do an overall power rankings for the entire league, not just APAC region, New York would easily make the top 8. Without a single doubt in my mind, they would easily make the top 8. But, you know, as far as APAC region goes, 4th place for me, without a doubt. Anyway, that's another team I went on for way too long talking about. I'll try and be a bit quicker on these last 3. 3rd place, Hangzhou Spark. Massive improvement with Architect in the roster, and QOQ as well. Massive, massive improvement. I love seeing those 2 in. Mika was a surprise. I didn't expect him to come in anytime soon, but he looked great as well. They didn't have many issues with Mika coming in. Yeah, he played a great Mercy and a great main support. Just really big improvements coming from this team. Still not perfect, don't get me wrong, but I think QOQ has been great for them, and having Architect in has been amazing for them. And then Mika's just been a nice change up on the support roster, I think, that's just made it a little bit better. And this has benefited the whole roster too. If you look at the way Gushwei was able to play this weekend against Guangzhou and against New York, you can see he seems so much more comfortable. Not just because of QOQ being there on the front line with him being a nice change of pace, but also because I feel like he's a lot more confident in his DPS now to back up on his aggressive, to follow up, on his aggressive plays. Now that Architect's in and now that Architect's playing for them and Adora's not being fielded, I feel like Godsby is more confident in his carry plays. And then on top of that, Gushue is able to just be so much more confident to play aggressive and to play his preferred style of main tank. And it's honestly just been such a benefit for this team that they look like a whole different team with this. One thing before moving on I do want to shout out as well that I haven't seen many other people talking about is Pagion and his what he's been bringing to the coaching staff. Now, obviously, I don't see the behind the scenes of what's going on at Hangzhou Spark, but I can only assume that Pagion's had quite an impression on them because their main issue beforehand, despite all the player stuff going on with Sassin and Adora and all that, despite all that, their main issue, I would say, for the Spark was that they would just run rosters, they would just run strategies as far as their heroes go that just didn't make sense, and they were just not good, honestly, not good strategies, not good compositions of heroes. But this weekend they've seemed very on top of things, and I might be completely wrong in saying this, but I feel like Pagion has probably come in and set them straight as far as that goes. He obviously has a big brain on him, being the previous head coach of a finalist team in the Vancouver Titans. So yeah, shout outs to Pagion. I think he's probably made quite a difference on the coaching staff of this team. Anyways, second place, Guangzhou Charge, easily the most underrated team in the Overwatch League right now. For whatever reason, I never see anyone talking about this team, but they are great. They are a really great team. Shoutouts to Krong. Krong, I think, is probably the most underrated player in the league at the moment overall. He's a phenomenal off-tank player. He's incredible, actually. He's insanely good. And he just gets no recognition. I never hear anyone talking about Krong, so hopefully in the coming weeks more people will come to recognize that, and Krong will get more clout behind him. Chara as well I want to shout out, because has anyone really noticed the difference with the Guangzhou Charge since Neptuno left? Or not left, but since Neptuno has been unable to play. Has anyone noticed the difference with them playing Chara instead? I think that's really impressive that Chara has been able to come in and just take over the reins from Neptuno, and there's really not been that noticeable of a difference in their play. I think that's very impressive, so great job to Chara. Happy, of course, his Hanzo looked insane. His Widowmaker, as ever, has been incredible. Like, what can I say about Happy? He's just a very, very good hitscan player. But yeah, overall, the Charge, I think, is just extremely underrated, and I think you could make a really strong argument for these for Guangzhou Charge being a top 3 team in the entire Overwatch League right now, which is insane when you think about it. Personally, I would say Valiant and Florida are just a little bit better than them at the moment, but I still wouldn't entirely disagree with anyone if they put them in the top 3 in the league right now. They are a very, very capable team. They're incredibly good, and I'm really impressed with them. Oh, and I also want to mention Eileen. Damn, he came out on Tracer and he impressed the hell out of me. Not because he just played an impressive Tracer, which is true, but also because apparently he had 1 week to learn Tracer. He was given 1 week's notice that he would be in and he would be playing Tracer. To play Tracer as well as he did after practicing for 1 week on the hero, that's insanely impressive. So big shout outs to Eileen as well. And when you consider that Charge has been playing with Chara and Eileen, who definitely aren't their go-to roster slots, and they've still looked like an arguably top 3 team, you should probably be able to say that, without a doubt, when Nero comes back in and when Neptuno comes back in, this team is going to be crazy good. This team is going to be one to really start paying attention to, I think, as possible top 3 contender. But yeah. Moving on, finally, number 1. We all know who it's going to be. It's the Shanghai Dragons. These guys are nuts. You look at them on an individual level. You've got Fearless, probably the best main tank in the world right now. You've got Void, arguably the best off tank in the world right now. You've got Fleta on the DPS, who's, I think you could probably make an argument for Fleta being the best player in the world right now. He seems to be able to play everything at the best possible standard that you can. He seems a lot like Rascal in that sense. And then you get Lip as well, who he's had his moments where he's not looked great. The EMP clips come to mind when I think of that. But Lip, for the most part, has been incredibly consistent as far as hit scan DPS goes. And then you get their backline, Lee Jae-gon as well. You know, he's another one where I can think of... He's definitely had some throw plays that he's thrown out there, but Lee Jae-gon, for the most part, has been an amazing Lucio and an amazing break for them as well. And then... Izayaki as well. If you've seen my channel, you know what I think of Izayaki by now. I think he's the best flex support in the world. So, stacked roster, honestly. And then I think their coaching staff on top of that have been doing great. Really, they just seem like an extremely powerful team. I think you could make a very strong argument for them being the #1 in the world. Personally, I would still say Shock hold that spot. But I wouldn't disagree with anyone if they did say that Shanghai are the best team in the world right now. If I had to really scrape the bottom of the barrel for a potential hole on this team, they do seem to fall back on dive quite a lot. But they play it so well, can you really say it's a disadvantage for them? And even saying that, it's not like they're bad on any other comp variants. They seem insane with Brawl. They seem extremely, extremely capable with double shield spam comps. So I can't really say it's a hole when they're also phenomenally good at the other two as well. But they do tend to fall back on dive quite a bit, and sometimes in situations where dive isn't exactly the optimal strategy. So I think maybe teams like Shock and possibly Valiant and Florida and Guangzhou right now might be able to exploit how much they fall on dive, how much they fall back on dive. But at the same time, their dive is so ridiculously good. They're without a doubt the best dive team that have ever played. They're the best team to ever play dive. They are the best dive team of all time in Overwatch history. That's saying a lot, considering previous teams that have run dive a lot. Like, well, I don't need to go into that. But yeah, the one issue I can think of is that they fall back on dive quite a bit. But their dive's so good that it's really not an issue. But yeah, that's my APAC region power rankings. Here is my overall power rankings here, just for you to look at if you want to go back and watch the previous video that I made, the NA power rankings. There they are. They're laid out for you. And yeah, that's my overall power rankings. I hope you all enjoyed. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to leave them down below. I'll try and answer them as best I can. And yeah, if you have any thoughts of your own that you want to drop down there, if you want to drop your own power rankings in the comments section, I'd love to read over them and give you my thoughts. But yeah, those have been my power rankings. Thank you so much for watching.